Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the globalist project and how the globalists have reached a critical point in the further implementation of the globalist project. And so they've identified, I will allege, the primary obstacles, as they would see it, to furthering and completing and entrenching the globalist project. So what are those obstacles? Well, there are a number. This is major obstacles. I'm sure there are minor ones around the place, but they can deal with those in their good time. And as they institute a police state all across the Western world, they can then they can come back and deal with those minor obstacles later. But the bigger obstacles, they kind of have to do something about. So now, the big obstacles are, in the globalist perception at least, is Russia just simply won't play ball with reshaping their society to fit into the globalist project. So they won't have race, gender conflict. They won't, the government won't be an active participant in promoting and creating race, gender conflict, unlike in the United States or Britain or Australia, where the governments or their pretend governments now, they're controlled by the globalists, are actively and aggressively promoting race, gender, and lifestyle conflict. And so the Russians won't put LGBTQ propaganda in the schools, and so that, they won't get on board with the mass migration and this sort of thing. And so they're a white society that's a holdout that wants to be homogenous white and homogenous Christian, and they want to be they don't want to participate in any of this silly globalist nonsense. Again, race, gender conflict, and LGBTQ, and so on. This means that they're a serious obstacle, because no white country is allowed to do this according to the globalists. Every white country must have maximum ginned up race, gender conflict, and so on. And Russia won't have any of it, so they are an obstacle to and they're too big. They're 140 million people, and they're just too big to ignore. Unlike, say, Hungary, with 9 or 10 million people, they can be heavied and browbeaten and threatened, or ultimately ignored. Once the Russia's been got out of the way, as the globalists would perceive it in their game plan, once Russia's been got out of the way, Poland's already looks like they've succumbed to the globalist touch, and then they can surround Hungary and really browbeat them into submission, which I'm sure is the interim plan that they're already have really started and they're building up to. Now, so Russia's got to go. So, well, how do you get rid of Russia? They've got nuclear weapons. They've got a sizable population, quite a large military. They're quite rich in natural resources, including oil and other things like gold and so on. So they're not that easy to push around. Sanctions against them have really quite a small effect. In fact, they have a bigger negative effect on the countries that are putting the sanctions on Russia than they do on Russia itself. There's been skullduggery in blowing up that gas pipeline that goes from Russia to I think it was northern Germany. The pipeline goes to, and it appears, and it certainly strongly suggests, that the globalists, using the Americans to do the dirty work, sabotage that pipeline, just as they would have seen it in the globalist geopolitics perception. Would have fucked up the Russians, but it didn't. It seemed to have more of a negative effect on Germany than it did on Russia, but through reducing the amount of natural gas available for things like heating and so on. So Russia had to go. But how do you do this? So you got to find a pretext that makes you look like the globalists look like the good guys and the Russians look like the bad guys. And so that disputed area between Ukraine and Russia, where there are majority ethnic Russians, and where the Russians wanted to integrate that into Russia, or parts of it anyway. that was the convenient flashpoint. So if you're a globalist sort of, one of the venal, and there's many of them, globalist strategists, remember the globalists trying to impose an ideology, so they don't need consent and think that consent is largely irrelevant. They're going to impose it. If they have to go to high-handed means to do it, well, hey, they're allowed to, in their perception at least. So they used this flashpoint between Ukraine and Russia. Now, Ukraine has got there is no way in Ukraine as a military force could oppose the Russians. So the Ukraine should have cut the best deal they could have. I think they tried to do that. Then the Americans, as again under the control of the globalists, just decided to change the government so they could have a government that was amenable to globalist interests. And this, of course, led to direct provocation of Russia. Oh, we're going to put Ukraine and everything in NATO. With the Russians, it clearly said, look, don't do this, otherwise it's going to aggravate things. And so they did it anyway. So there's a deliberate and willful program of provocation until the Russians engaged in military action, which they did. And then that was see, look at those evil Russians, Putin, Nazi, fascist, Hitler, and the propaganda machine just went into full gear. And so we've got to help Ukraine. Ukraine's border. If we don't help Ukraine, then the whole world will come to an end. Oh, that's the story we're using about climate change. Oh, it doesn't matter. We'll use it about Ukraine as well. Everything will come to an end. So this is the globalist position, and then all globalist controlled governments in Britain and elsewhere we're solidarity of Ukraine, and we're going to shine the Ukrainian flag onto the fucking Parliament building. I mean, it was a shameful and disgusting, gross display, indicating just how much all Western governments are controlled by the globalists. It was absolutely shameful. Anyway, so that was Russia. Now, again, Russia's just getting in the way. They all white countries must succumb to the globalist project, or else. So that was now the next obstacle is the most cohesive nation states in the Middle East, so representing Islam in this case, and the most prominent nation state, the most populous, but also the most homogenous and integrated and so on, is Iran. Now, and Iran is I mean, it doesn't mean Iran's good or bad or anything like that, but they are the most homogenous, and they're the least likely to get on board with the globalist project. The idea of getting the Iranian government or to control the Iranian government and say, hey, you've got to spread race and gender. Hey, you've got to take in mass migrants. You've got to have LGBTQ, rainbow flags. There's zero chance of the Iranian government going along with that. So in the globalist perception of the world, well, they've got to go. We've got to go. If they won't get on board with the globalist project, we just have to sweep them off the board. That's it. They've got to go, and we're going to take those motherfuckers down. Now, that doesn't mean the Iranians aren't doing all sorts of moves to destabilize. Well, the Americans doing plenty of moves to destabilize various places in the region, and the Iranians are not slow in taking advantage of that and inserting their own agitators and stirrers within those areas, whether it be Yemen or anywhere else, and or even amongst Hamas and the Gaza Strip, for example. So the Iranians aren't slow to do that. So how do you get at Iran? You can't attack Iran directly, because then that would be and you're the bad guy. So you've got to try and fix it so that Iran's the bad guy. And so you use the same playbook again, the same copybook you did with Ukraine. You try and create an incident somewhere, and Israel's the perfect cat's paw for that. They're effectively a client state in many respects, and so they're being used by the globalists, as indeed Hamas is, I would suggest. To create a drama flashpoint in the Middle East. They're counting on the fact that Iran in some way or some form will be drawn into that conflict, which will then be the pretext to go after Iran and then break up what the globalists would see is Islamic hegemony in the Middle East. And if they can break that up, as the globalists again perceive it, then they've got this globalist nirvana of opportunities opens up in front of them, and they can have wall-to-wall rainbow flags all across the Islamic republics. I think that's doomed to failure, and I think it's some starry-eyed bullshit idea about. And if they can't get the rainbow flags wall-to-wall across the Islamic, then they can at least destroy all hegemony and destroy all cohesion in the area, which would be that would be their default second position. If they can destroy all cohesion in the Middle East, then they would take that, I think, as an acceptable second prize. Now, the next threat to globalization, of course, is Donald Trump. The people want to vote for him. They like his policies, and in any free and fair election, he will win and win handsomely. They know this, so they've either got to take him out and neutralize him completely, and that would be a very dark path to go down if they thought they couldn't get him through legal lawfare. And what will they do next? The options are rather chilling to consider. So they have to create an incident. Again, same copybook, same playbook. Let's create an incident, and we'll use that incident to go after him. So we look like the good guys. We are the defenders of democracy, even though we're destroying democracy. We are the defenders of the law, even though we're eradicating the rule of law. We are the defenders of due legal process, even though we're eradicating. So they hide behind these things of we are the defenders. We're the good guys. Trump's the bad guy, and all. So January 6th it was an insurrection by Nazis. Hitler was seen going out the back door just a moment ago, by the way. So they actually engineered and allowed this to happen, invented it, and assisted it, and inserted agitators in the crowd. The deep state, the globalists, did everything they could to use this as a launch pad to go after Trump in the same way as they used Ukraine to go after Putin, in the same way they're using Israel to go after Iran, and so on. So again, the same copybook. Now, the final major obstacle to the globalist project, of course, is any remaining freedoms of the press, and they control pretty much all the mainstream media worldwide, and so. That's not a problem to them. There's a few sort of smaller outliers that still have a semblance of independence, like GB News or some small cable channels in Australia and that sort of thing. But there's very little of it. But the internet allows still, to some extent, a freedom of expression, and that's something that they want to shut down. That game's been changed by Elon Musk buying Twitter, or now called X, and given that Twitter is the opening sort of the hottest off the press news typically comes through Twitter. So that the globalists don't control Twitter is something of huge concern to them, because that interferes with their ability to control the news. Who can say what and where and who says it, and all the idea of which stories are going to lead. Now, they could control all that through Twitter and through the various Western hating, white people hating, straight white male hating fact checkers and diversity and inclusion of the news type departments that were in there. That god awful Indian woman who was doing it, and the gay Jewish guys and all that sort of thing. So they now lost control of that, and there's also a large following for a whole range of commentators on social media. When the list goes on, Joe Rogan, Mark Dice, and so on. Too many to name. And Tim Pool, who have very substantial followings and who are influential in the news, what is discussed, how it's discussed, the views expressed, and so on. So they have to shut that down. That's a threat to globalization. And again, they're going to they'll set up some sort of a situation where Hitler comes back from the grave waving a swastika and runs down Madison Avenue, New York, advertising his his social media site, and they go, look, it's Hitler, swastika, Nazi, Third Reich, fascist. We've got to shut down the whole thing because those Nazis, and they'll attempt that. And they're already really doing it in now, whether they do it by steps and say things. Well, if you misgender somebody, or if you utter misinformation, and we have the sole power to arbitrarily define misinformation, then we'll fucking throw you in prison. And that's code speak for if you oppose the globalist project, we will crush you. And so those are the four pillars of Western societal destruction. And now, given that in Western nations, freedoms and integrities and contracts, social contracts are very much the bedrock of our societies, then Western societies, white people, stand to lose the most. If you come from a fucking third world shithole where the law is arbitrary anyway, and you've got no civic involvement whatsoever, then you don't really give a fuck. As long as you're being given trinkets by whoever's got the most money, then you're good to go. But it's the white people who are the losers, and thus it's the white people who have to be crushed to make way for the globalist project and its implementation. Given that the globalist project is ideological, it's imposed from above and purely ideological, then a police state is an absolute necessity and extension of that, which of course is where we're heading. But they can't go full bore. They can't go 100% on that yet. They see it that they have to remove these other obstacles. So Russia, Iran, Trump, and any remaining freedoms of the press or social media, once they're gone, that's it. Then we move into the end game. And that's where the globalists want to go. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.